out, just shadows of doubt, keeping me cornered inside. Here I am, standing right before you. Here I am, trembling at your word. Here I am, seeking you in silence. Here I am, here I am.
When we talk about root sin and root graces in our lives, I'd like to just kind of go back to what is obvious. I'm kind of the Captain Obvious in some ways, but I think it's infinitely fruitful to come back to the origins of what is the root grace in my life, in our lives as human beings, and ultimately as people of God. And how does that start to get fractured? To reflect on who we truly are in our created selves as beloved creatures of God and children of God. Ultimately, we're one family, right? We all have the same Heavenly Father, and we are meant to be in communion. We are made in the image and likeness of God, and it's important actually that God is as we know, not just an individual isolated monad. That's not what we believe. God is communion itself. God is a community of persons in God's very self. There is giving and receiving. There is love and being loved within God, right? From all eternity. The Father eternally begetting in love the Son, the Spirit flowing from their love, the Spirit uniting them in love. There's no competition within the divine persons who God is, right? There's no mentality of scarcity. There's no winning and losing within the communion that is God, right? And we're made that way. We're made to be like that, to be in that image and likeness of God, in the way that we interact with one another, with our whole human family, right? And that all sounds kind of maybe nice and pious and pretty, but it gets pretty poignant. It's kind of a little jarring in a sense to reflect a little bit on this, especially right now at a time of election season, let's say. It doesn't exactly feel like the human family, at least in this country, is living in that communion very well, right? And it's not just them out there, it's me too. Like somehow we get drawn in, we fall into manipulations and deceptions that end up, even with good intention, separating us from others, us against them. If they would only change, if they would only be smarter, more like me or my friends, then things would be better, but that divisiveness is just so palpable right now within our human family. I guess it's always like that, but it certainly is pretty poignant right now. That's our backdrop, I think. That's the air we breathe in our culture, unfortunately, that sense of divisiveness. And I think it's really incumbent upon us to try, and by the grace of God, work a little bit extra to go beyond ourselves and not settle for those areas of divisiveness, right? And think that we, whoever we are, whatever our ideas are or whatnot, must win, or we must assert control in different ways so that things can get better. I think that's a little bit of some of the original temptation, even in the garden. And I think I just kind of want to reflect again, but very simple here, and very obvious, I know, but I love going back to to the origin stories that we've got in Genesis, and then the way things fall apart very quickly within the human family. Those who are made out of love for out of the very love of God, that's what generates the humanity. And it's telling that there is no humanity until there's both Adam and Eve. Only when there's a little bit of a communion possible within humanity, only then is there really humanity. When it's just Adam, there's no humanity. Right? Only when there is another one to look upon and love, and to gaze upon and love, and to be loved by, that's the beginning of true humanity. So in other words, we really are meant for relationship. If we don't have anybody to be in relationship with, that's not what it means to be human yet, right? And that's a pretty fragile situation, to only be myself when I have the opportunity to be in relationship with another, and to go out of myself and care and love for another, and also to be loved by another, right? And that's a fragile situation. It could go south very easily, and in fact it does in that story, right? And not just to be in communion with one another, but to be in communion with the one who has given us our lives, the one who's generated us out of love. And there's always such a poignancy and realism, but sadness in that story of the garden. Up until a certain stage within those stories, everything has been, and Adam and Eve knew it, everything had been given to them. Everything was gift, and they knew it. They knew that they were gift to each other, and they knew it and felt it and lived in it. And they knew who gave them the gift, right? And even that little throwaway line, or that little subtle phrase after the fall happens, when it talks about then one day after they're hiding out in shame after the fall, the way it talks about God shows up in the garden at the breezy time of the day to take a stroll with them. Apparently that's the way they used to do it. That was their daily routine before. The only thing they had to do, the beginning of that human family, Adam and Eve, was enjoy that garden, enjoy each other, enjoy the giver of their lives, and to be in friendship. Go in a stroll in the breezy time of day. It's such a beautiful kind of image. And that's all there was to do. They didn't have to clock in, clock out. They didn't have to pay any insurance. They didn't have to battle traffic. They didn't have to track social media. They didn't have to beat somebody out for a job. They didn't have to do any of this, right? That the original state is to be in a state of receiving and allowing the heart to be filled with gratitude and to enjoy. It seems to me the only job at the core of the human condition is really to receive and to enjoy and to love, right? It's so simple. And then that other voice starts to come in to the picture, that voice that starts to complicate things, and that voice that starts to throw things up for grabs. The way that serpent comes in that one day and says, and hooks Eve first into a different kind of dialogue, a different kind of relationship. They had been in communion and communication with God as a friend, and now once God is out of the picture for a moment, they start to have this other little separate side conversation. And that other voice that starts to come in, did he really say you can't have any of this fruit, of any of these trees? You can't touch any of these trees. It goes to this extreme distortion, really, of what God has said. And then Eve, in all piety and all devotion, immediately comes to God's defense. I think it's so fascinating, the trickiness of this very quick couple of dialogues. In all earnestness, Eve comes back and says, no, it's not all the trees. It's just that one tree that we're supposed to stay away from. And then, but by that time, the evil one has her hooked into a little bit of a distorted start of a conversation, and a distorted way of starting to think about things. Okay, well, if it's not all the trees, now the enemy, the evil one, gets more aggressive, I think, saying, you're surely not going to die. if you take fruit from that one tree. In other words, God is a liar, right? It sure has seemed nice up until now, but God's holding something back from you. And that aggressive, taunting, and distorting voice, and getting her to feel like, wait a minute, now I start to go back and think to myself, and we do the same kind of thing. What is really going on? Is God really on my side? Is God really have my best interest at heart? Does God really pay attention? Does God really care about my situation or our situation? Is God actually, I thought God was good, but maybe God's been holding back. Maybe God's been stingy. Maybe God's just messing with me, with us. And all of that confusion of voices and thoughts and what ifs. I think that's also kind of interesting in that original story. The what ifs of this reality. What if he really is holding back? What if he's being stingy? What if I could get more if I just grasp and get things under my own control? Um, and it's the what ifs, I think, that start to undermine in so many ways who we truly are, and and that and that's the beginning of this divisiveness, this separation, this division. First, a suspicion about who God is, the one who's given everything in the first place, and then old Adam gets drawn in there too, and and then once their eyes are opened in this, they're in this state of divisiveness and fear and suspicion and shame, all those different dynamics. God comes in and says, where are you? What happened? Right? A very simple question. What happened? You know, well, we're hiding in shame now, you know, and and then blaming, of course, blaming each other, right off the bat, and especially Adam's response, so pitiful, but also so realistic too. What happened, Adam? This woman that you put here with me, she made me do it. In one little line, he throws both Eve and God under the bus, just like a sixth grader, right? Or a 49-year-old, like we do that kind of thing, right? It's not my fault, it's everybody else's fault, right? And just the sadness of the way things kind of break up. And but I think to go back also to the way that that deception also comes from the evil spirit, that is, I think, pretty interesting. This didn't daunt me. I didn't really get this insight till actually when I was studying here at Boston College. Michael Himes, a theologian here, had a little essay one time about that Genesis story. And when the enemy comes back to deceive and to manipulate, one of the things that he says is, if you go after that fruit and take things under your own control, then you will be like gods, right? And this Himes kind of essay, I found it really illuminating, very beautiful thing to reflect on. He says, there's something very strange there, that the promise is that if you take and if you grasp and try to get control, you will be like God. You're going to get something. You're going to be like God. What has happened, though, is that they have forgotten already that they were already like God. Right? They forget who they already were. Right? Only a few verses earlier in Genesis does it say, God says, let's make man in our image. Let's make man and woman in our image and likeness. Right? So from the very get-go, they and we are already like God. We already have that dignity. We already have everything that is to be given. But there's a very curious forgetting and a very subtle forgetting that the enemy leads them into. And to just and to think about just a kind of a split second of forgetting who I am, and then panicking, and then feeling like I could still get more. Boy, everything starts to devolve from there. And I think that's a really great thing to keep considering, and I think in some ways our whole spiritual lives in some sense is trying to remember, How can we remember who I am, who we are from the very beginning? Can I come back to that memory of the truth of who I am, where I don't need to feel in a place of scarcity or defensiveness or fear or resentment, right? Everything's already been given in that dignity that I have because God has loved me in the way that God has loved me, right? Everything's been given already. And yet, how much time do we spend grasping after other things, grasping after the affirmation of others, grasping after a successful career, grasping after raising the perfect kid, whatever. We fall into that. I think that's kind of one way of thinking about our major challenge just as human beings is the futile efforts we're making so often at grasping and trying to create something, generate something of our own that was there the whole time, right? Um, and so that's the beginning, I think, of that root kind of sin. And I think, to go probe a little bit more deeply, just for ourselves too, and no doubt in your experience of the exercises, having explored those deceptions that we've fallen into, and the way that we operate out of a distorted view of ourselves in our sin that we fall into. It's not so much the sins themselves, but what precedes those sins. When I have fallen into sin in times, cutting off other people, cutting myself off from God, whatever it is, how much of that has had to do with my sense of that I'm just not right? Something's not right in me. Something is off. I don't feel adequate. I don't feel loved. I feel dismissed in my life. I have been hurt and betrayed, and that becomes the narrative of my life, and everything from there starts to shape the way I end up causing more harm because of my own sin. But how much of it does have to do with that root area in my life and my human experiences, my ordinary human experiences, no doubt in growing up too, right? Things happen along the way. Maybe I had my moments along the way where I really was like in the garden. I was just enjoying everything. But then some things happen. I remember as a little kid, I have a couple of memories. One, I think we had just I was driving around with my mom. I remember that. I guess we had just gone to maybe Sunday Mass or something. And we're driving around town, and somehow I was in this argument. I think I was about 6 years old or something, but I was asking her, and I was kind of indignant about that one line, the way it used to say before you go to communion, Lord, I'm not worthy to receive you, right? And I said, I'm not worthy. What are you talking about? That's crazy. I don't want to say that, right? That's not true. I just absolutely felt like that's just off. Of course I'm worthy. I'm the number 6 out of 6 kids. Everybody loves me, right? I fit, I belong. I'm the little mascot of the family. Like, what's the problem? I don't feel unworthy. Why am I saying that when I go to Mass and go to communion? And then that kind of came back to me years later when I was in college, and I had occasionally made some decisions that were maybe not the best decisions in college. And I remember going to Mass on those Sunday nights in college and going up for communion. And that became my go-to line. Lord, I am not worthy to receive you. But I can't believe you're still giving yourself to me, right? That became the line I wanted to throw out became the go-to line that was kind of the truest line in the Mass for me at that point. So, it's kind of to think about those. What are the things that have happened along the way that have caused in myself, and to have an appreciation that everybody has some kind of root distorted view of themselves too, probably a root sin, as it were, or a core wound. We say different kinds of things like this. Everybody's got something that they're operating out of, including myself, that is just off. There have been wounds along the way, sometimes self-inflicted wounds, sometimes it's the wounds that come from life and other people. But all of us have those wounds in our lives that start to distort us in the way that we interact that lead us into gossiping and being judgmental about other people, trying to prove that that we are worthy and so on, or that we are good, that we want the esteem of others. How desperate do we get because of this core lack of something that does not feel solid or healthy or lovable? And, just to quickly jump ahead briefly, I think the other great kind of scriptural framework for these things is if you leap all the way ahead from Genesis and into the beginning of Jesus's public ministry, before he begins his work of the redemption of the world, bringing all people back into the family of God, knowing that they are beloved. It starts with his own baptism and our own baptism, right? And again, for Jesus in that moment in the Jordan, he is totally open-hearted and receptive and hears and takes in after he surrenders in the water and humbles himself. He receives everything that the Father has to give to him, which is to say, you are my beloved, and in you I'm well pleased. That's the only thing you need to know, and Jesus gets it, right? Adam and Eve knew that for a little while in the garden. You're my beloved, and in you I'm well pleased. Then it kind of fell apart. But I think it's a kind of a good bookend, in a sense, or a recapitulation that comes with Jesus's own baptism. He gets who he is. He's beloved of God. He hadn't done anything to deserve it. He hasn't gotten a job yet, even. He's just barely left Nazareth, right? Nothing's really happened yet. But it turns out this is what the Father's been telling him from all eternity. You are my beloved, and in you I'm well pleased, period. That's it. It's the only thing you need to know. And then the way those temptations come in immediately after, I think that's also telling, the way the evil one starts to come in and again tries to call things into question or throw things up for grabs. What the Father has just told Jesus, you are my beloved, and in you I'm well pleased, that's just a fact. Well, then the enemy comes in and starts to call it into question, tries to hook Jesus into pretty fascinating conversations, right? If you really are the Son, then prove it. The first temptation is prove it. You yourself prove it. Let's see what you've got, and turn that stone into bread, right? Again, I think appealing to maybe Jesus's devotion and piety. Yeah, I want to come to the Father's defense. I don't want the Father to sound like a liar. I want to show that I really am. That's the temptation, maybe part of the temptation. But Jesus, unlike most of us, probably doesn't fall for it, right? Doesn't fall for that temptation to have to prove anything. And the second temptation being, okay, if you don't want to prove it, then make the Father prove it. Throw yourself off of here and see if he catches you. See if he really does. Make him prove that you're his beloved. And he just doesn't fall for it. Jesus continually is the one who remembers who he is, right? And doesn't fall for these hooks like I do, or like perhaps you do at times, right? And I think so I don't know, I just think those but when we are the ones who do fall for those things, I do need to prove this about myself, that my worthiness or my lovability or my adequacy or whatnot. I need to signal my virtues in life and so on, and make everybody think the things I want them to think about myself. We get ourselves in all kinds of messes because of the ways we're trying to prove something that actually has already been given.
Here I am, standing right before you. Here I am, trembling at your word. Here I am, seeking you in silence.